As Fernando said, I'm Patricio Mac Adden, that's my mail, and my Twitter is Maxawan. Don't ask me why. And I work at the National University of La Plata at CETFI. That's about everything you need to know about me. So this talk is about Sinatra, but also about good practices. Sinatra, as you may be aware, is a DSL for rapid web applications. Is there anybody who doesn't know Sinatra? Everybody knows Sinatra. Somebody doesn't know Sinatra? A DSL is a language created on purpose to solve a specific problem. That's what Sinatra is. It's a DSL for solving problems of creating web applications quickly. In Sinatra, we have rules that are code blocks that respond to a verb and an HTTP path, as in get, slash, and hello RubyConf Uruguay, get slash name, that's a variable, a symbol, it's a placeholder, and says hello, and then the parameter, give it, and then post slash, etc., and so on. Sinatra provides us a way we can render views in a simple way. For instance, if we require slim, we say slim index, and Sinatra already knows how and where to go to pick templates. I don't show the results because if not I would have needed too many screens and I didn't want to bore you. But in this case, if we say slim index, it will go to look for the template that's called index and will render it. It also has support for static files. So if we render a template that has a reference to something that seems to be static, like in the slash screen CSS, we don't need Sinatra to process it and to be associated to code block. Block code, so it will give you the file itself. Here it changes color red. We also have filters to execute actions before all the routes or a set of routes are executed, or some specific one. In this case, what we'll do is to set at name, that's a variable, and what we're going to do is to return hello RubyConf Uruguay. These are just examples. There are helpers, those are methods that we can define, and we can use them in any part of the application, as in this case, that we define the method name that returns RubyConf Uruguay. The examples are all very similar, and what we're going to do is to draw them in the slim template. The good thing about Sinatra is that we can, as the way we did this, we can have a variant and we can define parameters of the application. In this case, what we're going to do is to set a parameter that's called name that will be RubyConf Uruguay, as you may have imagined, and what you get back is hello settings.name, and it gives you this value. And the good thing about it is that we can configure everything is similar. So we have before filters and environments.
También tenemos error handling.
We also have error handling. Each action can fail, so what we can do is to trap those errors. And so that when we send an error 404 when they don't find the action, it will give you back the execution of this block code. And the same thing when we have an execution that for some unexpected error has an exception. In this example, if we did get slash, it wouldn't find it because it's not there, so it would execute not found and would give us back that string. And if we go to slash raise in get, as we have an exception, it's going to give an example, a string that says whoops or out. Very simple. Then we have two ways we can execute Sinatra. One is the classical way, as all the examples that we just showed, where they define the routes in a file, and you execute Ruby, the name of the file, and you execute. Well, you raise them to the web server. And the other one is the modular form that is neater because you have a class that it has to inherit from Sinatra base. And what we're going to tell it is run. So when we do Ruby, is we run the classes, the modular classes. Something wonderful about Sinatra, as you may know, is that it's a middleware rack. That means that we can use a lot of middleware, a lot of racks existing and in Sinatra, and to mount Sinatra and other applications and do whatever we like. In this case, we are using, here we are going to define a username that will have a password secret, and whatever we do, for instance, get slash is going to request an authentication. So far, everything is fine about Sinatra. But what happens if we want a more interesting application? The official documentation of Sinatra tells us that it isn't a typical model view controller framework, but that it ties a specific URL directly to a route and an HTTP verb. So most people think that Sinatra is not good because of that, and they don't dare use it because Sinatra doesn't have directory readings by default. It's not so much so, because when we develop static files or when we render some view, it goes to get them to some specific directory. In the case of the views, it goes to views, and in the case of static files, it goes to public. The problem is that it has no clear separation between controllers or sets of actions. Everything is intermingled. So at the beginning, you may get confused. Nor does it have any ORM by default. It has no ORM. So we can use whichever we want. So it has no database by default, nor does it have any tasks. We can't create a Sinatra task saying Sinatra new application project or whatever. So people may not dare use it, nor do they have any default test framework, although Rack test is recommended. It's a very good library. I think that Brian wrote it. Somebody here. Brian, who's here, developed it. And it's very good to test rack applications in general. Of course, we can use minute tests, whatever. So Sinatra doesn't decide anything for us. So what do usually people think? People think that Sinatra's idea for prototypes, when I have to do something quickly and I have to show it to a customer, I do it with Sinatra because I don't have to use databases, Rails, or APIs where I can get a Sinatra application and to mount it on a Rails and to use Sinatra for API or for small apps. For instance, at the university, they tell us that what happens is that we have an application that's huge, a mammoth, and we have to add functionality. So what we do is to create small apps that may create APIs, and these small applications can be implemented with Sinatra. So people usually say that the best use of Sinatra is for APIs, prototypes over small apps. But I don't agree. Why shouldn't we use it for large apps? For me, there's a problem, and the problem is that Sinatra is very flexible. So as we can do whatever we want, as the app grows, we can create any monster we like.
El primer problema es que
So the first problem is that Sinatra tends to get disordered. Not Sinatra really, but developers. If Sinatra goes to look in views, we'll do everything in new views, and it doesn't matter because it will go and get it. But when the application grows and we have too many views, everything is a mess. So another problem is how to organize the controllers. As the application grows, the routes grow, and as they do, if you use, for instance, a classical app, we have a file where we have 1 billion lines, and that's not easy to maintain. We have a bunch of ways we can organize the controllers in different files if we use the modular form. For instance, using rack mount or rack mac or class inheritance. I like inheritance better. This is also a problem, how to organize controllers. The inconsistent use of DSL. We can have many files, and we can have, for instance, we use rack mount or web app. And what we do then is say, well, when we get to the little URL, it will attend this file in this phase, and when another URL comes in this other class. The problem is that as we don't have a clear structure in those classes, we may have just anything. For instance, use Sinatra namespace and not use Sinatra namespace, so we may have files that behave differently, and they do similar things. Imagine, for instance, an AVM and another simple AVM. That may be complicated. Obviously, it's not like Rails, where you say Rails generate scaffold products, and it develops all the URLs in a RESTful manner. It's wonderful, and for EPRs it's very good. But here we can't, or at least we don't have that way we can guarantee that they're all going to be RESTful routes. So we may have a chaos. Another thing that I didn't mention was the inline templates. We can define templates at the end of the file, of any file, any Sinatra file. The problem of this is that it's ugly. It's to maintain something inline. For a small app, it's okay, but for a larger one, it's more complicated. It would be even worse if you have inline templates and the standards templates. Those are the templates that are in a different file. So this would be absolute chaos. And so on and so forth, and we have many crazy things. So what is the solution? The solution is that there's no the solution. It's what I think is a good solution, that's my solution. There would be no single solution. As I said, the talk is also on good practices. My solution is let's be clever and let's implement good practices. Is there anybody who doesn't know what a good practice is? Everybody knows. So we could start by defining a directory structure, where we say that we have controllers. So the people controller, the product controller, let's organize the views in specific directories for each controller. Let's have a place for controllers.
Let's have a place for configuration. Let's have a place for the models. Let's organize things well, like Rails. A good exercise that I've done is to say, well, let's have a Sinatra app that looks like a Rails app. That's great fun. Now, how will we manage controllers? I told you that we have different ways of managing controllers with RollMap, which is a middleware rack, or rack mount, or class inheritance. And I like this last one because all the controllers will have the same configuration. If we configure one basic Sinatra control, and all the other controllers will inherit that configuration. So if we go back to what I was saying, the fact that you can have controllers that don't use the same DSL, then that's a problem. So that inheritance is what we can use to avoid this. ORM. This will depend on whether we need an ORM or not. Many apps, if we use Sinatra for lightweight or for smaller things, then we might not need an ORM. If we don't need an ORM, then let's not use it. But it's a decision that you have to make. Now, if you have an ORM, you have to use a database. If you like a specific database, that's the moment to choose it. And then you have to decide on a test framework that you want to use. Obviously, rack test, mini test in general, for the unit and functional tests. And the most important decision is whether we are going to do a classic or modular app. I like modular apps because they are more object-oriented than the other ones. So it's more comfortable to interact with objects and not to have everything lying around in a text file. We should have to define a default configuration, and this is linked to what I was saying about having the class inheritance. If we configure everything in one single class, then configuration propagates the other. So to have one single configuration for a full project is essential. And then to have different environments, if we have development, testing, production, then in our supposed framework, it should be neat to have this configured. Then you need a template engine. I like Slim because it's very simple and it's easy to read. You can use just any, that's what you decide to choose. So what we would have there is an application template. We create a directory structure, we create a controller that we call application controller, which behaves in an X way. We require the objects that we want to have, then everything is executed the way we want and configured the way we want. We have the different environments, but something is missing. This would not be a framework. If we want to have a framework, then we have to have tasks. For example, to create a project, to create a scaffold, to create controllers, to create tasks, why not? And auto-load. If we have the directory structure, we know where to look for the controllers, where to look for the models, and where to go to look. Well, in general, we need to know how to load what we're going to include in our project. So, what we have to recall and remember that the problem that we had before was that Sinatra is flexible. That's not a problem. That goes in our favor. And rack. Rack is essential. If we use rack and we are clever, then we can do what we want. So I think I was very fast. I showed you 62 templates.